Hey there, and welcome to You Talk. We connect with extraordinary people across Canada and ask them about their stories, passions, and experiences. I'm your host, Ryan Funk. A new award-winning documentary directed by Jennifer Holness tackles the often dangerous portrayals of Black women in media and the shift in North American beauty standards towards embracing Black female aesthetics. Jennifer sat down with me to discuss the film and how we can improve representation in our media.
Hi, my name is Jen Holness. I'm a writer, producer, and director, and I directed the film Subjects of Desire. I actually have my own production company, Hungry Eyes Media, and I've been sort of making film and television for the last, 20 years.
That's something I'm wanting to maybe pursue in the future, get into more like productions and documentaries and thing. So what first got that bug for making media and documentaries?
So you know what it is that, when I grew up, my mother, there was three of us and we didn't have a lot of money. And so I didn't really understand how to make films or any way to get into the industry and so forth. I met my partner at York University and he was in film studies. And that was what kind of opened up the idea that I could work in film and television. But when I first started out, I had graduated from York University with a specialized honors in policy analysis and political science, a fancy political science degree. And I decided that I wasn't going to go into politics or become a lawyer, any of those kinds of things. And I just decided I was going to try film. And that was the thing. But what the backstory, though, was that growing up, I would write at home. I was a completely avid reader. And I didn't actually have those connections or see those connections. But then I read, for example, Stephen King on writing. And the fact that I was writing as a kid and that I was reading as a kid, that there was a natural push in me around telling story. And so at some point, like I said, when I graduated, I decided to move and pursue that. And then I started out producing primarily. And then in my producing, I was always story editing. I was always writing stuff. And then I realized that that I wanted to write, which is what I had been doing from a kid. And then I decided that, and I started doing that. And it helped that I had actually taught myself how to produce so that I was able to do the writing and the producing. And then on the documentary side, my very first professional project, I co-directed a documentary about Black Canadian history. And I was really, really jazzed about that project. And we did it with the National Film Board, and it really turned out well. And I wanted to direct more documentaries, but, I had 3 kids. I was writing drama. I was, producing drama, and I was also producing other people's documentaries because I always loved documentaries, always kept a foot in it. So even though I wasn't directing, I was producing other people's docs. And then I guess in 2017, I made a decision that, my kids were older. I really had sort of probably not pursued this element of filmmaking, directing documentaries that I really loved and that I think I was, good at. I hadn't done that, and I decided it was time. And so that is how I ended up, after making my first documentary in 2000, to make my second documentary, but a feature this time, starting in 2017 and delivering it in 2021.
Isn't that just fun how your path can just lead you to a certain spot that you didn't initially expect to reach?
My entire career is like that because, like I said, what I went to university for, I completely didn't do. But, I think what it was being brave. When I graduated, I was invited to actually submit to law school. My grades were really good. I had the program I pursued. I could either go into business, I could go for an MBA, or I could go for on the law side. I didn't want to do that, but I think I was brave I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I was brave. I decided at a very young age, like, no, that's not what I want to do. I don't know what this film thing is, but it feels right. I went with my gut, I went with my instinct. And then I'm a really hard worker. And so what I did was I had to figure out what make producing films was about. I had to figure out how do you write for. So I did that. You know, we didn't have a lot of mentors. We didn't have a lot of people who could support us, and we didn't know anybody in the industry. But that was not that important. What was important was how do I figure out how to do this work well so that I could make a living from it. So yeah, that was the assignment, I guess.
Smaller production companies, they really turn, at least in my opinion, some of the most profound work, or work that really hits you close to home. Like it's definitely something you're really invested in, the communities and people. Like, you know what's going on. You got to feel for everything that's going on.
I've always been very community minded. And I do think that we have a problem in this country where we're really predominantly publicly funded, and we don't support the voices of all the people that make up the public. We haven't historically, and that's been a problem. And so being outside of the story engine of Canada, like in terms of my community and any focus on our stories, has really, it is a painful thing. I mean, everybody, every group wants to be seen and heard. We want to believe and know that we count. And being a part of the media world, that's it. You know, someone told me, and it's brilliant, it was Dr. Charmaine Nelson. She said, we know about slavery, most people, 99% of people know about slavery, predominantly because of the movies they've seen. Very few of us like randomly will go into a bookstore and say, hey man, I'm going to read this treatise on slavery, right? But yet we know a bunch of stuff about slavery comes from movies, you know? And so that's the power of media. That's the power of story and cinema. And so imagine spending most of your life where so few people have been given the opportunity to tell stories about your community, you know, and when they have done it, it's been very narrow. So it's maybe just been about slavery. It's not been about the nuances of, you know, like what you might go through if you look like this as a Black girl, or if you come from this household as a Black boy, you know what I mean? And so I have been always community minded because my community has always felt disenfranchised from the larger system of media and what we get to tell and who gets to tell it. So I think, though, oftentimes that's where the beauty of the unknown comes. You know, you get like a story that takes you into a world or into a space that you thought you knew, and then you realize something incredibly pivotal or something personal. I mean, there's just a lot of story out there and there's an exciting times, and where we're now starting to see the value. I mean, I didn't watch it, but all these folks watched Squid Game. I hate shows where people get murdered. You know, I hate murdering shows. It's upsetting to me. You know, I read The Hunger Games because my kids were reading it, but I couldn't watch the movies because I just was so traumatized from the books. I don't like that extreme violence, but like with Squid Game, for example, everybody watched this show. And, you know, and guess what? That's because someone recognized story out of that community, out of those creators, was valuable to the larger, and it engaged people, right? And that's what we have to do. We have to expand our story world, and that comes out of community.
Representation in media is so powerful. Like, Encanto that recently came out has been amazing for the Latin communities. Being able to see those stories, see people who look like you and you can relate to, it's so powerful. And I mean, for individuals like myself, we've had people in media who look like me for so long. So it's great to see, I guess it's a cultural renaissance in a sense. So Subjects of Desire. What can you tell me about your film?
So Subjects of Desire is about Black women and beauty, but it actually looks at the fact that beauty is about power, and that if Black women were not considered the standard, like the standard of what is considered beautiful, and beauty is power, that is meant, what does that look like for Black women? It's also about the fact that there have been very dangerous, destructive narratives that came out of slavery and colonialization with an agenda, these narratives, and that these narratives have now become so interwoven with how we see Black women and how we see Black culture, we don't even question them, but they're dangerous and they're destructive, and they create a mindset in Black women and girls where they don't love themselves, where they have challenges embracing themselves. And also, it actually gives power to people over them. So, for example, just on a legal scale, it looks at the fact that Black hair, something that has really defined us as very different from whiteness, has been used to punish and ostracize Black women. You know, we have that moment where we talk about Bo Derek, and that when a judge ruled that you could discriminate against a Black woman for her hair, that a Black woman had to conform to what the office required, that she could not have her own natural style. The judge literally said, and this is a legal precedent, that look at Bo Derek. She had braids in the movie 10, and she took her braids out. So hair is mutable. Why is this Black woman trying to be like Bo Derek and have braids? Never mind that Black women for centuries have had braids, that Bo Derek and the producers were mimicking Black women, not the other way around. But that is used to actually cement in law the ability that if I go to the workplace with my hair in cornrows, my boss could say, you can change your hair because our policy is that we have to have this kind of hair. So this is the kind of stuff that's been happening to Black women. And then people turn around and says, well, why are Black women straightening their hair with chemicals? That's dangerous. They must be crazy. They must want to look white. Versus the fact that society has actually made it almost impossible up until a certain point for Black women to walk around in the hair that God gave them.
Talking about the hair, it reminded me a few years ago, like when you Google search like professional hairstyles, it would only be like white people and their hair. I just quickly did a Google search now. I mean, it's still overwhelmingly non-representative of, people in the workforce. But, there are a few.
It's changing. But I got to tell you, when I was 15 years old, I put braids in my hair, went to work because I had a good job, I thought. And my boss told me that my hair was rude and sent me home, told me I had to change my hair if I wanted to work there. So these are the things, I mean, think about it, how debilitating something like that is, especially since for me, in not having straight hair, always wanting to have straight hair. And then I put braids in. So I had long braids and I was like, what? I'm flat, looking so good. And then I go to work and then it's like, no, your hair is rude and you have to change it or you don't have a job. I mean, but then the other stereotypes, the Mammy, the Jezebel, the Sapphire, those stereotypes limit our movement into the world. I pointed out that, Billie Eilish is phenomenally successful. Lana Del Rey, Adele, Taylor Swift. None of these women who are terrifically successful have had to present a sexualized image where their legs are open and their butts high. But almost every single Black female star in the music industry right now is completely sexualized. I can't name a star, a big star that is Black that isn't overly sexualized. right? You got Megan, you got like Beyonce, you have Doja Cat. I mean, Nicki Minaj. The biggest the Latina and Black one. She was a stripper. And she did the video WAP with Megan Thee Stallion. I mean, Cardi B. Yeah.
That's it. I was just thinking of
Yeah.
something. I can't just.
These are phenomenally successful women, incredibly sexualized.
With your film, how did you approach this subject? How did you want to, kind of showcase these hypocrisies that are shared within our societies?
What I discovered when I was doing research, I wanted to do a comprehensive look at this because I felt that we had to understand historically where these narratives came from. So I felt that was very important. I felt like I couldn't just do a film and say, oh, Black women are discriminated about by their hair. I had to look at the source of things, right? So that comprehensive look, for example, showed us that, Black women and their hair was considered ugly. And then Madam C.J. Walker came along and she came up with a methodology to press or straighten Black hair. And then straightened hair was progress. Straightened hair was professional. So that is out of history, right? But then why was Black hair considered ugly? Well, during slavery and colonialization, there was a narrative of the mammy, fat, older. She had her hair wrapped up because it was untenable in some way, right? And that mammy was a caregiver. And that narrative of Black women, caregiver. I want to really go back and say, where did this stuff come from? And you look, most of the movies that have been made up until recently about Black women have been about, essentially mammies, about maids, Black women who are maids. That's it. And then, the same thing with the sexualization. So I wanted to go back and look at all of those things first. So that's what I started at. But I also wanted to look at present day. So how did these things manifest themselves today? What does that look like? What does Mammy, Jezebel, and Sapphire look like today? It looks like the snip, snap, angry Black woman. Oh my gosh, she's crazy. It looks like the very sexualized Black woman. And, and other than that, it looks like that Black woman who's fat and unattractive. And she's just there, though, to complain, but also serve. So look in media up until recently, like all the roles literally filtered through those kinds of narratives.
If you go back far enough, all of this is tied to like white supremacy and oppression. And it's sad seeing that it is so present still to the modern day.
The unfortunate thing is that there's people invested in actually maintaining that. I mean, we've seen what's happened, in the political landscape in America to some extent, where people are like, let's take out the knowledge or the information about some of these structures and they call it critical race theory. Let's take it out. Let's not teach anybody this stuff. And let's just teach them the worst.
The whitewashed version.
And people are invested in doing this today. That's what's sad. That is what's sad. And so my film hopefully will be a counterpoint to some of this,
How do we continue to move forward and dismantle some of these harmful and
I think it's allyship. It's allyship, For one thing, I mean, I hope my film really contextualizes things so that people who aren't, because these things are so ingrained, people don't really think about it. Like, you know what I mean? Because, for example, for years, Black folks were saying the criminal justice system targeted us. And the dominant culture was saying, oh, that's because you're at the wrong place at the wrong time. Or what were you wearing? Or what did you say to that officer? And then these cell phone reveals started to show us that no, they weren't at the wrong place at the wrong time. They were just jogging down the road, and so I think that my film in some ways is a little bit like that, in that it actually shows us some of these narratives, and it's then for folks to say, I understand this better about Black women. I understand like these narrow confines in which they're being defined. I understand how my behavior, like when I don't believe a Black woman, when I don't stand up for a Black woman, when a sister is doing this and she's doing the most, but maybe it's like I might be the one that's threatened because she's like doing this thing and I'm like, I'm not doing this thing. So it's really about understanding first and foremost, and then saying, I'm going to stand up for you. I'm going to be there in your corner, or I'm just going to sit down and have a conversation with you. And that conversation is not going to be about what that sister can do for you, but who are you? What floats your boat? What's going on in your world? And I think ultimately I'm a filmmaker because I'm inherently a hopeful person. I truly believe that in spite of some of the things I'm seeing unfolding over the last 4 or 5 years, I truly believe that our progress is possible when it comes to race and when it comes to structural and systemic racism. I truly believe that we can really work and solve this. I mean, I don't know if you've seen this, but like Saturday Night Live does this thing with Tom Hanks where he plays like a country bumpkin, and there's other Black like Black folks, and then the whole thing shows us how much like white country bumpkins and Black folks are completely similar. Like they like the same food. They're like, there's a whole host of things that they really do have a lot more connections than not. And so I don't know. I'm always hopeful that that this getting together, this communicating will actually expose and allow people to explore that they have more similarities than they have differences.
Well, exactly. When you just meet people and get to know them, like, of course there's like cultural differences. Like when I first started dating my partner, learning about like Filipino culture, Filipino foods, or like when I would use certain terms, like the funniest story is when I just couldn't find anything. I was driving around all these communities, and I just told her, it's like, it took me on a wild goose chase today. She's like, why are you chasing geese?
Okay. Yeah.
And it's just such a cute thing. And so there's things like that I've shared, like things that I thought were just common knowledge and just ingrained, but just those different cultural aspects. But like, just because there's differences doesn't mean that's a bad thing. Like, you can learn from each other.
Yeah, and that's the pivotal thing. I think it's to learn from each other. I mean, there must be a whole plethora of things about her culture that you don't know about, how those communities form and what is valuable to those communities as a Filipino woman. And it's about the problem with patriarchy. It's always perceived that the knowledge flowed from one way, and the thing is that it actually doesn't. And so when you start embracing these differences, and when you start embracing that there might be certain knowledge. I mean, I always look to my mom, who has all this like this country remedies. You know what I'm saying? And she's always like, okay, yeah, you got COVID, you got to gargle your throat, you got to take this, you got to take ginger and this, and you got to make this. And so there's always this stuff my mom's always telling me you got to do. And it's very different from North American society. There is a real, like the first line for her is always something natural from the ground or whatever. And, and I've come to understand it, because I mean, we might be of the same flesh and so forth, but I was raised in Canada and I have a very North American idea about medicine and so forth. But then at some point I start to realize, wait a minute, my mom, what she was taught from her grandmother, whose grandmother taught her, some of that stuff is super valuable. And that's and that's the embracing of things that are different, because people assume that because I was raised by a Caribbean woman that like I didn't want mac and cheese. Like when I was growing up, I didn't want like the baked mac and cheese that was like a I wanted Kraft mac and cheese, right?
Oh, crap.
Right.
The college
Oh,
kids
listen,
food.
I was like, this is ambrosia. What? Now, of course, I'm like, give me the big mac and cheese because it's like gourmet. But the point is that this dominant culture, patriarchy, white supremacy, all of these things, it has to be dismantled, and the voices of others have to be brought into that space, and so that we're actually sharing and learning from each other and communicating. And I think for me, my film is about communicating something important things, some great important things about Black women.
What do you think we can do to keep our media and society accountable for, moving towards progress and acceptance and representation?
You got to hold them accountable. You have to challenge them. You have to say, I did an article with the Globe interviewed me, Sarah Ty Black, who's just a really wonderful journalist. And she asked me, and I said, we have to have gatekeepers, and we have to hold the gatekeepers accountable. And so what that means is that we have to challenge it. So rather than saying, oh, I have my film and it's doing really great or whatever, and I've arrived, I'm saying I'm actually putting it out there that we have to hold these people, the decision makers, accountable. So what we have to do is that sometimes it might not be in our full interest to actually hold people accountable, but we must do this. It's like my children hold me accountable. They say, Mom, Dad, you've ruined this planet for us. The environment sucks. We can't maybe get homes. We don't, they're worried, and my children are holding me accountable. And so what that means is that when, one of them became a vegetarian and one of them became vegan, we embraced that. And we then shifted our eating habits, which, by the way, for being Caribbean, it's like, they're like, are you crazy? So that's me being accountable as much as I can. So we have to hold, because, for example, my children hold me accountable. And so we must say to the institutions, also we have to look at what was promised. What are people saying that they intend to do? And if they're not doing it, we got to go back to them and say, hey, man, you said this. We're not seeing this. We also have to be honest, we have to actually stop this madness where people think that there is no truth. And what I mean is like, it's this truth, it's that truth. No. Some things are true. And for those things, we can stop explaining away and, there's too much acceptance of falsehood. And when we come across it, we have to say, this is what's happening. We have to stand up for what is right. We have to stand up for each other, and we have to stand up for, what is a true thing. Is there a systemic problem with Black men in the criminal justice system? Absolutely. Do they get different sentences for the same crime? Absolutely. Are they profiled at a higher level? Absolutely. These are truths. And so what are we willing to do to make that not be the case? Right? And that's what I'm trying to say, is that so we have to really hold our gatekeepers responsible for what they say that they're going to do. And we have to also stand up when we see a truth being dismantled or broken, or we're creating some alternative version of reality to justify injustice.
We got to stand together on these things, because, the way things are going, we can't just let things continue. Like, the status quo is just not acceptable. Like Subjects of Desire, it's a first step in kind of bringing awareness to the problems that we're seeing within our media and society, and now people can see it and they can be inspired to work together towards greater things.
That's my hope. That's definitely one of my goals and hopes. I want, young Black girls, for example, to watch this film and understand that they're not at fault, that the things that they're feeling are actually true and they come from a certain place. I want young white girls to say, okay, this is my friend and this is how I can be a better friend because now I understand certain things about, what's happening here, pretending that these things don't exist or whatever. I want those things to be, to fall away. And so, yes, I'm hopeful. And I know that in the screenings that I've had and, the conversations people have brought to me about the film, I do think that it's actually having some great impacts in this way. And that, as a filmmaker, to have impact, to know that people are watching your work and seeing value and actually getting something from it that they can bring to their lives, I think it's very powerful to me, and I feel very, very grateful for that.
Well, Jen, it's been so great talking with you. I've had a lot of fun learning about your life and just, discussing like the real things in reality that we need to be focusing on and challenging. Where can people go to find out more about Hungry Eyes Media and Subjects of Desire?
Okay, so Subjects of Desire is going to be on TVO on Feb 1st. And I believe there's a couple of repeat dates. In the US, it's going to be on Stars on Feb 26th. Hungry Eyes Media, we are hungryeyes.ca.
I'm excited. The trailer was so good. I'm really excited. I just projects like this, like challenging your own thoughts. Like, I grew up in Winkler, like a small rural town. Getting out of there, like I realized, like, wow, I had a lot of ingrained biases that I never realized, and getting challenged on those, and just interacting with people has been like.
I think people just have to get out of their spaces. This is one of the challenges of COVID, of course, is that it's keeping us really insular. And I know that like my mom was like a single mom raising 3 kids. And so we didn't have a lot of money. And when I was old enough, we started, like, I think when I was 15, we went to Montreal on our own, my sister and I, and then we went to New York, and then we were like in Miami. And then when I got older, I was able to travel to Europe, and traveling, and of course, going back to Jamaica, but traveling in these spaces, talking to people, finding out about how people live, it really shrinks a lot of the misunderstandings. And so it's great that, you speak of your own journey and acknowledging that there were these biases because that society puts them into you. Kids are not born, this, they're not born biased against someone. Society does this. So, but I do think stepping out of your comfort zone, reaching out to someone across the aisle, sometimes it's actually scary and sometimes it might not work out. But that, I reached out to Black people who have not been necessarily welcoming to me. But I've also reached out to Black people who have been incredibly welcoming and who have made my life a better place to be in this space. So, that's the thing I just keep saying to people, you just got to push yourself to get out of your comfort zone.
And not just the mindsets of learning different people, their thoughts, beliefs, and experiences, but cultural food.
Well, that's the exciting part. Today at the office, we have a young lady who's Nigerian. And so I've never tried Nigerian food, right? And so like my partner bought a bunch of, so we're, it's like some of it's, you're going to love it. And some of it, you're going to be like, but at least you're trying it.
Yep. That's something I've been so excited about, like There's so many like really cool restaurants right where I live in Winnipeg, and when things open up a little bit more, gotta check them all out.
That's right. Get out there in the bag. Get that, yeah. It's so fun. I have to go too. When I go to small towns in Ontario, for example, every once in a while, you'll go into a small town and there'll be a restaurant, and then they'll have like some kind of like Caribbean dish, and of course white owners, and it's like, and then you find out that they came from Kensington Market, which is like this really cultural hub in Toronto, and then but they've gone to this small town, and then they're bringing this really cool ethnic food into that community, and I love that. Those are my favorite experiences when I go out of into different spaces, because I'm a downtown Toronto girl. But you go into these rural spaces, and then you find like these gems, or like people who make butter, or people who bake stuff. Like, I don't know. So food to me is like, it'll save us all.
If you have any stories you'd like us to share or communities we should highlight, leave a comment on our social media or reach out to us on our website. I'm Ryan Funk. This was You Talk, and have yourself a good one.